So my journey to faith took a very, very, very long time, about 44 years to be exact. I grew up in a Jewish home. My father was Jewish, and my mom had been raised Southern Baptist, but converted to marry my dad. Religion wasn't something that we talked about, and faith was not really something that we discussed. We went to Sunday school at the synagogue from kindergarten to 6th grade, and at that point, my dad gave us the option of whether or not we wanted to be bat mitzvahed or not, and my sisters and I decided not to be. So at that point, my dad pretty much stopped going to the synagogue completely. We did, as children, celebrate Christmas and Easter with my mom's family, but again, Christ was not something we discussed. We didn't really have any understanding of what Christmas or Easter were about, and it wasn't anything that we talked about. My family the subject never came up. It just wasn't anything that we really had conversations around. So we grew up with no real foundation of faith, no understanding of Judaism or Christianity, really. And because my parents were kind of private people, we weren't really an emotionally connected family. We kind of were left on our own to kind of navigate through life. And when that happens, when you don't have a compass spiritually and you don't really have a compass here with your own family, and you're left to your own devices, you make a lot of really bad choices. I didn't know what having a relationship with God was like. I didn't have any inkling that you could be engraved on the palm of his hand, or that he would have knit you in the womb and knew you before you were born. Those concepts totally, I just had no clue. So I felt alone a lot. I felt like a misfit a lot. I felt like I didn't fit in and I didn't belong and I had no real value. And when you feel that way, you're looking toward externals for validation, other people to make you feel like you matter. And I did that in my male relationships. When I got old enough to date, I looked for them to fill that void. I realized years and years later, no human, no person can possibly do that. I got married right out of college. We had children right away. And my husband at the time didn't want to be married. He didn't want the obligations that come with having a family and being committed in that way. He wanted to continue to just be free and do what he wanted to do. And so that relationship, needless to say, ended in a divorce. And before that relationship was even finalized, before that divorce was final, I was already involved with somebody else. I didn't want to be alone. I didn't want to face raising children by myself. I didn't want to experience the stress and the fear and the anxiety that goes along with doing all of that without support. And my parents, although I love them, were not the kind that were going to say, yeah, move in, I'll help you out. It was more or less that you made your bed, lie in it, figure it out. And so the idea of having someone else come in and sort of save the day was very appealing to me, because then I didn't have to struggle and I didn't have to do it by myself. And he was perfectly fine with the kind of pop culture Hollywood mentality of you can have a relationship and not be married. It's an antiquated concept. It's just a contract. It doesn't mean anything. We can chart our own course. We can decide for ourselves what is right. And because I didn't want to be by myself, I fed into it, bought into it, and it was like, okay, fine, you're right, we can do this. And he, about 6 years into our relationship, fell under investigation for criminal fraud. I didn't know that all of this was going on. I had no idea that this was happening, because I had basically entrusted my whole life, my accounts, including my bank account, my credit cards, everything. I just kind of passed on to him, and he was responsible for handling it and managing it all. And it wasn't really until I was subpoenaed to show up at the grand jury trial, where I was presented with evidence that he had also forged my name, used my credit, my accounts, my bank, everything, to also do some of these business deals that were fraudulent in nature. And that's when it really when things kind of shifted for me, when I realized that my whole world for about 7 years had been a complete lie. I didn't understand how to have a relationship or what any of that meant until about 2013, 2014, the very end of 2013, when my whole life hit complete rock bottom. Their dad had come out of prison, was in and out of their life, and I was struggling to make ends meet. He wasn't paying child support. I needed that money, and it was about $13,000. He was citing parental alienation as the factor that caused this, saying that I had deliberately made it so that he could not have a relationship with our children. And in the state of Virginia, if they can prove parental alienation, you can lose your kids. So I hired an attorney because the idea of losing my children was like cutting out my heart, and you may as well just run me over because I wouldn't have survived that. And that's when things kind of shifted. I was home working remotely and my doorbell rang, and it was a lady on my doorstep, and she happened to be a Jehovah's Witness. And I was a mess, kind of like I am right now, and I couldn't hide it. And she saw that, and she asked if she could just come in and pray for me. She didn't give me literature. She didn't try to push an agenda. She didn't ask to talk to me about her faith or her belief. She just sat me down on my couch and prayed for me and let me share my story with her and just listened. And what I so appreciated about that was she met me where I was. I didn't know what to believe. I didn't have any understanding really of faith or God or Christ or anything. And it wasn't even about that. She just treated me like a person who she saw was in need and took compassion and just listened. And that opened my heart to the idea of having a conversation with her later about who Christ was. And she came to my house for a year, almost every week. And she would just sit with me and we would read scripture together. And she showed me how to read the Bible, how to get to know God and Christ through just reading His Word. I had never done that. I didn't know how to do that. As time would pass, and I wasn't just listening to her, because through time, yes, she did start to explain what a Jehovah's Witness belief is. And I wasn't just listening to that. I was listening to other sermons. I was reading books. I was doing my own research too in connection with her. And we took divergent paths, obviously. And that relationship eventually kind of faded. But I credit her so much for just building a foundation for me that I didn't have before, that I could then use to kind of grow. And at the time, I had met my now husband, and he was a believer and had been baptized as a teen. As I would have questions, or I would challenge things, or I would question and doubt, he was always there to kind of pull me back and challenge me and keep me grounded and kind of refocus me. And so he was growing at the same time that I was learning and growing, and our relationship just became really solid as a result of this entire experience. While this battle is ensuing and we're engaged in real warfare, so to speak, we're also growing in our faith and our love for God. And that's where I grew to understand who Christ was as a person and what Christianity truly meant. And that you can't have Christianity without Christ. You can't pick and choose the parts you want. You can't take Him out of the equation and still have it. It doesn't work like that. So I had done all this research. I had done all this reading. I was praying. I was reading scripture. I was talking about it with my husband. I was just insatiably trying to get as much information as I could. And I then finally asked myself, what is your holdup? what is your problem? Like, you have all the evidence, you have the data. And it came down to a matter of choice and will. Now that I have it all there, it's right in front of me. Either I believe or I don't. And I look at this baptism really as an opportunity to kind of start over, a second chance to kind of live my life here on out the way it is truly intended, knowing that someone far more significant than anybody in my life loves me with such depth and has taken care of me the whole way, even before I knew him. I can think of nothing better than to live my life for his glory from now on. And I hope that for anyone who might have doubt or anyone who might be unsure, that my story helps maybe in some way turn that corner for you too.